Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Let's Talk About Cities, a podcast dedicated to making complex topics in architecture and urban design more accessible. I'm Katarina. I'm one of your hosts for this podcast. I'm originally from Vienna. I've been living there for 25 years, but now made the move to Sweden in autumn together with Matthias. In Vienna, I studied spatial planning, which kind of is a mixture between urban and regional planning. And now at Lund University in Sweden, I've started sustainable urban design as my master's program.
And I'm Matthias. I studied my bachelor's in architecture in Umeå in the north of Sweden and did my master's in architecture at Vienna Technical University. We hope you'll enjoy the podcast and join the discussion.
Today in this very first episode, we'll talk about gentrification, a complex process that is taking place all over the world, and therefore we felt like it's a good topic to start with. As some of you might know or know the word, but maybe not precisely the processes happening. And we're trying to explain what it actually means, where it's coming from, and also try to go through the different stages that can be seen when gentrification is taking place.
Yeah, and then we'll also give some examples of possible solutions or actions to take to hinder or deal with gentrification. We hope you'll enjoy the episode and let us know what you think. One by one, many of the working class neighborhoods of London have been invaded by the middle classes, upper and lower. Shabby, modest mews and cottages, 2 rooms up and 2 down, have been taken over when their leases have expired and have become elegant, expensive residences. Once this process of gentrification starts in a district, it goes on rapidly until all or most of the original working class occupiers are displaced and the whole social character of the district is changed. That's a quote from London Aspects of Change, a 1964 book by the sociologist Ruth Glass, first coining the expression of gentrification. And what we can read out of it is that it leads to displacement of poorer residents and that it changes the social character of an area.
Mm-hmm. But I think today we should really untangle this quote and go through all the different stages within this process and also think about what does gentrification actually mean? Can there be any positive aspects to it as well? And how does it start? Where does it start? And why does it start?
Yeah.
First of all, I think it's important to mention before the process of gentrification starts, there's oftentimes a disinvestment in a certain area. So the buildings might look run down or there are amenities that people would like to have that are just not there. And it can be a strategic thing for investors or developers not to invest somewhere. Mm-hmm. In order for it to become cheaper land.
Yeah, or even invest and then let it become rundown, as happens in many places, of course. But in Berlin, there's a firm and they take over or invest in rental property and then perform quite crappy renovations or don't renovate at all, and so try to push the renters out so that they can get new ones with higher levels of rent.
Mm-hmm. But maybe first of all, I would have liked to introduce the theory, the rent gap theory by Neil Smith beforehand, because I think it fits quite well right now. And so what the theory is about, it measures the gap, as it says, between the current rental income and the possible value of the rental income. So the developers see that there is a gap and therefore see this higher potential. And Neil Smith argues that the overall rental gap is, if the overall rental gap in an area is high, it is likely that it will undergo gentrification as the developers see the potential for the rents to rise.
Yeah.
So this might be a reason why an area, or like
why gentrification happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Yeah, but that's one theory, and I mean, as I've said before, I think it's in a way actually quite a weak one, because speaking about the potential to raise rents in an area and therefore increase profits, I think that's quite clear that would be the reason to invest. What else? I mean, it's the purpose of a real estate company to invest in order to achieve profits. So to me, it's a bit of a weak theory. And I mean, there are many others as well, competing theories. And I would say there are apparently American economists who favor a view that it's a cyclical thing, that it's a natural cycle, that it's not something really purposefully done by any agency or person, but rather just a natural cycle, that some areas are worth more and then time progresses and other areas are worth more, and those that are then worth less, in a way, become those with potential. Then there are theories looking into a multitude of factors, so economical situations, social situations, and really in-depth looks at the demographics and politics of an area, which we won't go into today, but just to illustrate that there are also competing theories as to why it happens.
Maybe we can try to illustrate a typical process of gentrification to explain it on an example. So, for example, we have an area that there might have been disinvestment in the past. So, as I said before, the buildings are run down, and it might be close to a center. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the suburbs, but it's been disinvested in. And then, therefore, the rents are low, and the pioneers arrive. So this could be students or artists that need spaces for their lofts and cannot pay such high rents, for example.
Yeah, that's a typical one.
Yeah, I'm trying
in any city. No. Yeah, sure. I'm just thinking when you say that, like artists and creatives, you get that example anywhere in Berlin or in New York with the loft renovations on Manhattan in, I don't know, the 60s, 70s. And in San Francisco also decades ago. So it's a reoccurring theme. And of course that changes the neighborhood that maybe has been or still is run down, but they leave their imprint. So they maybe open up some music venues, or they start putting graffiti on the walls, or I don't know, open some hip cafes or whatever. So they start to change the neighborhood. Yeah, and they create, a demand for, Starbucks is one super indicator of gentrification, right? You know, when your area gets a Starbucks, it's becoming gentrified. But those artists or creative classes moving into an area create a demand that then is filled, and with that, the real increase in value comes.
Exactly. So that, I would say, is step 2, that the people around notice there's something happening. I want to be part of this. This is like this trendy, hip vibe of the area that, you know, has this kind of roughness, and they maybe are bored with the super perfect neighborhoods that they have lived in before, and therefore they want to be part of this new upcoming district.
Mm-hmm.
And more and more people move into this area, even though they would be able to afford higher rents.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the economic reason they move there, but rather, being attracted to this trendiness. And of course, developers also see that there's a potential there, and that this whole district or area is supposedly gonna bloom and become more and more hip. And I guess in this stage might be that Starbucks comes and, as you said, like opens their doors then, and so also chains come there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have this booming district, and that actually, you know, for the people that originally came there might be a good thing, because suddenly they have all the amenities that they would have liked to have before and had to go further distances for, and suddenly they have it in their district. They pay their lower rents, and it improves. And I think in
but
this
likely
stage,
not, because with all those amenities and with all that activity, as I said, the value, the real estate value rises, and the rents rise, and the prices to buy apartments, if they are on the market, rises. So it's quite unlikely that the people who were there before, or even in the first wave, the creative classes, do stay. And I would also say that many of these creative classes, they value precisely this kind of derelict, forgotten character of an area. So when it becomes hip and trendy, they are already looking to move on to the next place.
This might be, but what I want to argue for is that there's a middle stage kind of where the people still pay. I mean, increasing rents doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it does, that there be like, okay, next month you'll pay $300 more, but it's quite unlikely that it happens overnight, and therefore there might be this in-between stage that they actually have this booming district that is super hip and so on, and and that the district has I don't know, like new supermarket and Starbucks and whatever, and maybe they like it because, you know, I think it's also important that there were people that were not just looking for this underground trend or underground image, but rather just couldn't afford it anywhere else.
Yeah, but are they then gonna afford a €8 cup of coffee at Starbucks or this organic bio supermarket produce?
Mm-hmm. Probably not. Okay, but we can move on to the stage where the developers, and I think that it's not, of course, not possible to separate it as such, but now the developers also see the chance to invest even more, and if people come there and would actually be able to pay higher rents, but they come there because it's trendy, they still might ask for improved, like that the buildings are going to be improved, or like the whole neighborhood, that the infrastructure is being improved, and that everything becomes a bit more livable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's in a way a bit vague, because I think it's not necessarily so that people moving there ask for this or for new buildings or so. I would say the new buildings are a chance for investors to create this value, because oftentimes there is rent control for existing buildings, and so the only chance that they can move beyond a certain limit in prices that they then demand is to build a new. So they build new buildings just to achieve this, and then they try to, with whatever marketing or so, to appeal to a certain demographic, or also in the aesthetics of the building. And of course they do their market research for what people want right now, if they're going to move into a new apartment, whatever that might be. A plan libre, so like an open plan, or kitchen islands or walk-in closet, I don't know. But they try to achieve this to pull in a certain, level of customer. And the other part is because obviously it's not just a matter of individuals and companies in these processes. It's also oftentimes involving local government, so the city government or municipality that also, well, I don't know, for example, rebuild the square or the streets, or try to introduce green aspects. So I don't know, plant trees or remove parking spots or so. So that's something to look out for, that measures like that are not always necessarily what they look like at first, just improving the quality of life in the city, and it's great and so, but actually in a way improving the value of that area. So very much out of an economical perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm not sure if it's the answer to say that improvement is a bad thing, because every neighborhood should be improved. It just, there should be solutions that this improvement doesn't come with displacement.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, revitalizing a neighborhood is not a bad thing, or improvement or whatever. So, but gentrification always comes with displacement, and the displacement is always a bad thing, because the displacement doesn't happen because the people want to. But yeah, we can go into different aspects of displacement later on. But
well, I think if you make it an aspect of what is good and bad, then you can also question, well, why is it bad that people get displaced? Different they move somewhere else, and then the value of this area is raised, and that leads to higher tax revenues and lower crime rates. Why wouldn't that be good to sort of sanitize an area like that? I'm playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah, I hope so. For the people, you mean? Or
no, I've said no.
You mean from a city's perspective? Yeah, okay, I was a bit shocked now. Okay. Yeah. But maybe we should talk about the different aspects of displacement and what kinds there are.
Sure.
There's the direct displacement, that residents are moved out because the rents are increased, and they just cannot afford it anymore. There is the exclusionary displacement, that the housing choices for low-income residents are so limited that they cannot go there. So it's kind of, I wouldn't necessarily call it displacement, because then they're not there, but they are excluded from this area. Yeah. And then there's the displacement pressure, that services that are supporting the low-income families are disappearing from the neighborhood. and they maybe that is also included, that they just don't feel a part of the community anymore. They feel that they're not being represented and feel not like the odd ones out.
I think that is that can be linked to other processes as well. I think that's not necessarily to gentrify an area, but this removal of funding for social services, and usually it also goes hand in hand with increasing funding for police and security services. It's something that's been seen, for example, in the banlieues of France, in the suburbs, with mostly immigrant population and social issues, that you remove the support structure that is there, increase the police funding, and then say, what great problems we have in these areas. Of course. So you increase the tensions, and perhaps you remember the scenes of riots and car fires in the banlieues, and similar in London, of course. I think it was, the London riots, but also a lot in Tottenham, in that part of London. In Sweden, for example, there's this idea of no-go areas, and you had Trump saying, look at what happened in Sweden last night. But actually those are long-term processes that are part of, I would say, a neoliberal policy to remove the support structure, increase the punitive structure or police, and then say, oh, look how bad it is in these areas, therefore we should not provide them funding. The same as the neoliberal approach to remove funding from healthcare, from education, and so on, and then say, oh, look how bad they are, we have to privatize them to increase the quality. So they create this need for their preferred action.
But is there a way to revitalize neighborhoods without gentrifying them?
There you get into, I would say, a bit of how to deal with gentrification in general, right?
Or to how to maybe not prevent it, but protect it a little bit from being gentrified.
Yeah, precisely. But that is then, a protection towards gentrification, or to prevent it. And to what degree, one can question. But of course, there's rent control, which is probably the most effective measure. If we look at, we didn't really go into earlier the different examples that I would have liked to do a bit shortly. We did, but if we mentioned Berlin and the gentrification there, so I think the most famous examples are the quite central districts, relatively, of Prenzlauer Berg, Neukölln, Kreuzberg, and there are more as well. But the question of Berlin is very interesting, because if you look at the history of the city and when it became a big city during the 1800s, it really increased hugely in size. And then in the early 1900s, it got even bigger. Also when the Groß Berlin, so the Great Berlin, was formed and included all the suburbs around it. And so, of course, it grew a lot bigger. But there was this trend at that time for the more well-to-do to actually live in large houses on the periphery of the city. And since then, obviously, a lot has gone on. Modernism has come and gone pretty much. There's been the Second World War, First World War, Second World War, the Cold War with East and West Berlin. But it's still interesting in that example, because in many other examples, it was always the center, at least in Europe, the center of the city that had a certain prestige to live in. And in Berlin, however, it was rather the periphery. So the center had this disinvestment, and therefore provided cheap and easy easily available living. And so these areas, Prenzlauer Berg, Neukölln, Kreuzberg, and so on, had an influx of the creative classes and young people. And then over more or less the last 30 years or so, since the wall fell, the Berlin Wall, people from the rest of Germany have moved in there from more well-to-do areas. There was this scandal, even, or not scandal, but controversy, because people from Schwaben, who are more well-to-do from West Germany, were moving to Berlin and creating this effect of gentrification, basically. So what there has been in Berlin has been a lot of direct action. So protests and a lot of community groups that have tried to fight this process. And I'm not sure how well that has worked. It's certainly been visible, but it doesn't really seem like it's been able to stop the process. But then in the last year or two, there's been a great success for these groups in Berlin, because they've taken the route of more parliamentary democratic measures, and now there is rent control in Berlin, or a new Mietendeckel. So Deckel is a cover that you put on a jar or something.
Rent cap.
A cap, exactly, a rent cap. And that is starting to have effects. And of course, the real estate firms are fighting it like crazy and saying how terrible it is. But that is one example that can really protect against or prevent gentrification potentially.
There is this thing called tenants' option to purchase, so that it requires people to that they are being offered to purchase the apartment before it's being sold to someone else. And I mean, I think there are many people that just cannot afford it, so it might be nice that they're being offered to purchase it, but then in the end, if they cannot afford, well, it's just a sweet step to do in between, but I'm not sure if it really helps, but maybe it does, I don't know. And there also is community land trusts, so it's non-profits that own land to ensure that it stays affordable for longer periods. So that's initially what I talked about, that of course it requires them to have quite a lot of money to buy the land, but then they can be the ones to decide how it is. Like,
well, it depends when it happens, I would say. With the community land trusts, it's more of a thing in the UK and the US rather than in Europe or continental Europe. But it depends on in what stage of the process a community land trust is established. Because obviously, if it's in an area that doesn't really have a high value, the prices wouldn't be that high, or you can even do it for a symbolical sum of, say, €1 to transfer the rights to this land trust, and then you avoid that whole issue if the land is owned by the municipality or the state.
There's also this thing called vacancy taxes. Of course, housing now is on the market, and if there's no housing, the demand will be higher because people need to live somewhere. And what many developers do is that they buy a lot of buildings and then they let it stay empty.
Just
then,
to serve as objects of
exactly. And I think it is incredible that but in a very negative way, that if people are looking for housing, and then there's like, for example, in Prague, the whole city center is basically empty because no one can afford to live there. And it's like this Disney World kind of space where it's beautiful housing and beautiful buildings, but no one can afford to live there. And then all the citizens of Prague actually live in the suburbs because they cannot really afford the city anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with identity as well. Who do you want to, should it be someone that is, I don't know, from outside Europe that can afford all those buildings and then is just
like
there?
in Vienna, where the first district is basically owned by Russians.
Yeah. And what does it do to a place? It's oftentimes empty, or it's just... Maybe then we can also talk about
the expensive
Airbnb
shops.
Or something like that.
I think we absolutely should. Yeah. But yeah, with these central districts, they're filled with the fancy shops and Louis Vuitton and whatever. People like to go there and look in the windows or even go inside and look at the products, but it's not really something they're part of in any other way.
Exactly. So one should think about, I mean, of course, when money is the main thing you think about, because of course you want to, as an investor, want to make as much money as possible, but the city should regulate it in a way and try to do everything the city can to put a cap on it, because
but again, there is I wouldn't say it's necessarily that easy to say just the city should do this or that, because yes, on the surface it might seem the reasonable or even right thing to do, but you could also argue foreign investors, even if they are speculating, do bring investment, and this investment will in some way trickle to tax and these luxury shops as well, and they do at least attract people and tourists as well. So and Airbnb as well, or if you look at the city center of Prague, then I mean they have millions of tourists, and this is of course very important for the economy of a city and even a state. So, and that is then again needed to have lots of other policies. If it's I don't know, housing benefits or so, helping people who don't have an income to have a place to stay at all, and so on. So I think it's actually a bit more complex than just to say, okay, control the market, create rules to stop the speculation and make sure everyone has a place to live, that we can avoid this inner migration in the cities and displacement. It is a complex topic.
For sure, I agree. But there are, however, things, I mean, we mentioned some now, but there are things that can be done. And to put it to a concrete example, I also quickly want to mention Vienna, that has this new zoning law, that at least from all the new buildings that are being developed, 1/3 of them has to be subsidized. The second third is affordable housing, and the third,
which is another level of subsidizing. So it's not
exactly
quite as much,
So actually, you could say 2/3 are in some way subsidized, even though they vary in between. And then the third is freely financed. And that quantifies, I mean, of course, it's not nice for the developers, but apparently they can still make a profit out of it, or it's still profitable. Otherwise, they wouldn't continue, I guess. And that really helps to make sure that there is housing for low-income families and that it's being continued to develop.
And to ensure a certain social mix.
Vienna has a rich history of affordable housing, and I think we will go into the history of das Rote Wien in another episode.
Red Vienna, yeah.
But it's important, I believe, that it's also there are regulations that ensure it for the future to still be accessible for different families with different incomes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing, lastly, I want to mention is that if you develop an area, in my ideal world, it would be that you get together with the community and talk about what is needed within the area, and maybe that an improvement of the area can happen in a way that is
bottom up, not top down.
Yeah, bottom up, and that they can still identify with their neighborhood.
Yeah. Speaking of Airbnb, as we mentioned it, I think about that you could also make an entire 1, 2, 3 hour talk, but obviously it can also be a driver of gentrification, as there tend to be a lot of Airbnb flats in precisely the central and hip areas of cities. So you see it all over Europe, and there have been much publicized controversies in most cities, but Amsterdam, for example, where they seem to be really, really fed up with tourists, and I think they've introduced laws already to cap Airbnb. In Barcelona, there have been protests and violent protests against Airbnb.
But then it's not only about the shortage of housing it creates, it's also about the over-tourism, that the people don't feel...
Absolutely, but in essence, it's comparable to the gentrification, because it's still about the conflict between different demographics. And in the case of Airbnb, it's the demographic of even more outsiders, because it's not from a different part of the city, or mostly not even a different part of that country, but foreigners. And without that meaning that it's about xenophobia, it's not just foreigners. They don't move there. They're there for a short while, and they don't care about the long-term character or anything actually about of the city, the quality of life there. So they come for a while. They are there for their pleasure only, and then they leave. And that creates a lot of conflict, and I think that's very understandable. So there has been that in many countries a debate on how to handle Airbnb, because obviously that again brings tourists. That's a source of income for the city in taxes, and also for the local businesses who might be very happy with that. And obviously, now during Corona, you cannot really travel, so Airbnb has taken a big hit. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens after Corona, if there is such a thing, and post-COVID with Airbnb, if they recover, and even if they slightly recover, if there continue to be laws and regulations directed against them, or if maybe there are competitors of Airbnb, like we've seen with Uber. Then there's Lyft and other firms trying to get in on the market and trying to have a slightly different offer. Will be quite interesting, I think.
We'll see what the future brings.
Yeah. Regarding Vienna and this right to buy, or Vorkaufsrecht or so. Since the 80s, there is in Vienna a fund from the city that has the purpose of sanitating and renovating the stock of housing. And a lot of that is rental apartments, partly owned by the city, or even newly built ones. What I want to get at here is that there's tax money invested by the city to improve, renovate, and sanitate the housing stock. And with that, in some cases, comes this right to buy or especially in the when new flats are built. And what this essentially means is that it's usually with a 10 or 15 year waiting period. So what this essentially means is that tax money is being invested to either produce and build or to renovate housing. And after 10 to 15 years, this is turned into capital and put on the market. So it's public money being transformed into private money. And I think that's really questionable. I think you really have to look at what's going on there, because it has this veneer, this appearance of being simply a positive measure of obviously either producing and building new housing, great, or renovating and sanitating housing that is below the acceptable standards. But in the end, that turns into private money, and I think that has to be looked at. Maybe we'll do that when we speak more about Red Vienna, because it's then kind of at the end of the story about Red Vienna and the Gemeindewohnungen and the housing politics in Vienna in general.
Yeah.
Right. So should we finish there? Do we feel like we've covered gentrification to some degree?
We're already going into different episodes, and
I mean, it's a scholarly topic of its own. It's an entire field of urban studies, so you can go as deep as you want, but
maybe we have covered the most important aspects. I
hope so, yeah.
And I hope that you guys have a clearer understanding of what the process of gentrification means, and what it's all about. What measures could be taken to maybe not prevent, but lessen the effects of gentrification. And we hope to have brought you some insights on the topic and are looking forward to a discussion.
Yeah, exactly. Let us know what you think. And
let's talk about cities.
Yeah. Bye.